a museum under the Department of Tourism. My name is Debbie Jones, manager of this facility. Wheeling was a very busy city during the Civil War, with supporters of both the Union and the Confederacy among its citizens. Today's presentations will highlight a few of those people whose lives were impacted by those turbulent times. Following the talks, the hall will be open for tours. Normally we start with a short movie we've had downstairs. If that's not the case, we can start up here, but I will be back at the end to take care of that if need be. This presentation is a joint effort by Friends of Wheeling. Thank you. And we'll have our Civil Roundtable. Thank you. If you're interested in joining either group, membership information is available over here on the chair, so feel free to pick that up. And again, welcome to West Virginia Independence Hall.
Good morning and welcome. My name is Archibald Campbell. I was born in nearby Jefferson County, Ohio, and graduated from Bethany College. I imagine you've heard of that institution. It was founded when I was just a lad of 7 by my uncle, Alexander Campbell. I then studied law in New York and moved to Wheeling in the spring of 1856 and began working at the Daily Intelligence, a newspaper. That same fall, I went into partnership with John McDermott and bought the paper. I became the editor. We immediately allied ourselves with the young but rapidly growing Republican Party. At that time, the party was quite liberal in its principles and was decidedly against slavery. Now, these were not the days of free speech in Virginia regarding slavery. The influence in the eastern part of the state was predominant. And although there were few slaves in the western counties, to be a Republican was considered but a little better than being an out-and-out abolitionist. And to be an abolitionist was but a little better socially and politically than to be tainted with crime. Indeed, a circuit judge in Wheeling, in effect, charged a grand jury that Republicans should be considered suspicious persons and obnoxious to the laws and institutions of Virginia. Needless to say, the Intelligencer was the only Republican daily paper in all of Virginia, and many predicted it would fail within 6 months. We stood our ground, however firm in our beliefs, and gradually our effect was felt. I was one of the delegates from Virginia to the convention that nominated Abraham Lincoln for president, and apparently the articles of the Intelligencer influenced some 800 votes from the county for Lincoln's election. I will say that most of those votes came from the workmen of the iron mills. It is very hard to change the upper crust of Wheeling. I'm proud to say that the Intelligencer became known as the right arm of the restored government of Virginia. And that President Lincoln told Governor Pierpont that a dispatch I had written was the deciding factor that led to admitting West Virginia into the Union as a state. When the new state constitution was written, I firmly opposed the clause that recognized slavery. And sure enough, the United States Congress sent back that constitution and required that it be amended to remove the recognition of slavery. Another of my efforts, of which I'm very proud, came after the Civil War. As you can imagine, there was a great deal of animosity towards those who had favored the South during the war. Many thought that the Confederates should be regarded public enemies and not be allowed to vote in future elections. But I believe that such policy would put us in the same position that was found in Ireland and would produce endless discord. I prepared a letter address and convinced many influential Union people to sign it. Of course, that produced great criticism. But I think that on reflection, people realized that the acceptance of our brothers, no matter which side they favored in the war, was in everyone's best interest. I never became a politician, even though many urged me to run for office from time to time. I felt that I could do more for the liberal cause through my writing than through legislation. And I will say that my public influence was most effective. My private life was not as pleasant. My beloved wife Anne died in 1871 at just 31 years of age. I remarried 7 years later to Mary Hollowell. Mary had been a teacher at a female seminary in Reno so I believed her to be a virtuous woman.
But
You can imagine my surprise one night in 1882. I had missed a train for an out-of-town trip and returned home quite late. As I reached my door, out ran one of Wheelin's wealthiest men, George Wheat, carrying his clothes. So much for my wife's virtue. I turned around, went to a hotel, spent the night, and sued for divorce the next day. Of course, the news of this event was never printed in the Wheeling newspaper, but due to my political prominence, it was reported in papers in Pittsburgh, New York, and Chicago. Despite the scandal, I continued to enjoy life. In my later years, I became involved in various business enterprises and traveled a great deal, visiting nearly every part of the United States. I also enjoyed sending back great reports on my extended trip to Europe. I stayed active in politics and served for a number of years as chairman of the state's Republican Committee. And I can proudly look back on the important part I played in West Virginia State. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Francis Hoge, and call me Frank. And as I cruised around the area, I noticed some of the legacy still standing. How many of you often have passed over the bridge on Market Street to go south to the southern part of Reno? Anybody tell me how many bricks there are?
Nope. More than two?
171? You're right, 171. The stones weigh about anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 pounds. There's 171. And why did I know that? I was chief engineer. Built in 1891. Amazingly still standing. And townspeople, sidewalk engineers would walk by and wonder how I'm going to complete that. First setting up the scaffold, then they wondered how it's going to connect. Somebody tell me the secret.
cantilever.
Gravity.
Keystone.
Yeah.
Major applause for putting that keystone in. So that's one of my living legacies that's still around. And I was born in Moundsville in 1841, and by the time I was 1 year old, my father had set up a business on Market Street, on 106 Market Street, where he was a lawyer and in real estate. I had a sister and brother who became a doctor here. And as I was growing up, what fascinated me in my free time was the river. I used to love to go to the docks, see the steamboats come in, talk to the captains, hear their stories, and I said, wouldn't that be a great adventure? I'm 9 years old, walking around, listen to these crew of the different steamboats come in, talk, and hear their stories about Cincinnati, St. Louis, New Orleans. I said, what an adventure that would be. Came close to that because I made it to the water through the Naval Academy. I was appointed to the Naval Academy when I was 16 and 17, and I graduated when I was 20, midshipman, and I was assigned to the Susquehanna, USS Susquehanna. That was in 1860, so you know it's not what I'm doing. And I started to see the world on my adventure. This is the Gulf of Mexico, Veracruz, all the way to the western part of Europe, and getting to the Mediterranean Sea. By the time we were there, it was 1861, and we heard news of something called secession. Remember, I was from Moundsville, Virginia. I'm thinking, this is going to grow into something more than just a political argument. The USS Susquehanna turned around and headed back towards the States, and secession was there. We heard about the conflict at Charleston and movement of troops being assembled, conscriptions sent out, volunteers sent out. So I had to make a decision from this western part of Virginia, which way I go. And when some of the neighborhood young men got together and decided we're going to go ahead and fight. Out of the 8 who volunteered, 7 went south with the Confederacy, defending Virginia. Officer named Gruder had set up a defensive line across the peninsula from Mulberry Island, which would have been on the right flank of the Confederate line, all the way to Yorktown. We were there to go ahead and secure that right side so it couldn't be outflanked. So from Mulberry Island, after almost a year, 1862 of March, there's a major battle. 2 ironclads. Who remembers their names?
Merrimack.
Monitor of the Merrimack.
Well, then it was called the Virginia.
Yes.
Okay? And we escorted the Virginia. We were able to take shots at the Monitor, but it, just like cannonballs you hear, the plates were pretty thick, it just bounced off. But it ended up in a draw, and we escorted, after that, the Virginia back up to James River, where we were just going to be put into retirement. So after Battle of Hampton Roads, we had to go ahead and figure out the invasion's coming. We're looking at, the Confederacy's looking at 150,000 men on the end of the peninsula. And we had been assigned to go ahead and defend and make sure some battleships like the Galena, USS Galena, would not make it up the James River, which would have been from Mulberry Island, about 7 miles. So I decided we'll go ahead and take apart some of the Patrick Henry, and we'll go ahead and take the Dalton cannons up a bluff called Drury's Bluff, 90 feet. Now you imagine 2 of those cannons weigh anywhere from 9,000 pounds to 10,000 pounds. Right? Through straps and ropes, we hauled them up, set them up, and made sure that we were going to be having a correct angle at anything that comes within 700 yards of Mulberry Island. If they do, they were sitting ducks. The Galena tried it. By the time we got within 700 yards to the last wake of Galena, and the hull was so shallow, or their hull was so thin, they took a beating and had to go back. Whatever refuge we could find, we'd go ahead and dam up. What we could do is sink everything in front of Mulberry Island, so none of the battleships of the Union Army could get through. We set up a barrier for them. Right, so for the remainder of that year, we were set up on an alert system. It was pretty quiet because McClellan was not going to send any ships up with James, or possibly even New York or the Rappahannock. All right, so the next mission was going to be a clandestine mission in 1863 in August. And it was going to be on a very warm summer time in August. Captain Porter and I decided we got to do something about the blockade that's set up in front of the Rappahannock River. So we come up with a genius idea. What we'll do is we'll take 6 rowboats, put them on wagons, let's take them across land, ships, and we'll get in and just take command of it. How many are we going to take? 80 men. Doesn't sound too bright. But we go ahead and we assemble everything and fly overland under the light of the moon, darkness, whatever. We get here, going ahead, set boats in. But I brought in empty seat bags for the oars to wrap them around. So all we've got now to worry about is the light of the moon shining and glancing off. And we got to try to get this in a secret move. Spies in the night. So wrap the paddles so slapping sounds will not be carried over, and alerting the crew on board who's on guard. Well, there it was, late at night. We put the boats in, the rowboats, and we're going to go after 2 ships, the Reliance and the Satellite. And we're going to make it a concerted effort, attack one and attack at the same time. I was the leader. I said, I told my men, I got to be the leader. I'm not going to be the one to say, here's what we got to do. You follow me. So 20 of us ascended the Reliance, got on board, and slowly made our way through, fighting our way through. Not slowly, we fought our way through. And we're moving along, in convalescing for about 6 weeks. I said, that's not going to stop me. So we knew about a ship called, let's see, what was the name of it? The Underwriter. That makes sense. I can't think of something with an Underwriter. Okay, the Underwriter that was keeping a blockade seal from any material coming from Europe into North Carolina. Underwriter Patrol came after us. We found out where it was located, so Captain Porter and I, we could do it again. We can do it again. All right, so it was anchored in one of the islands that Cape Hatteras, and everywhere we take 2 rowboats this time, and just 20 of us. Well, we're going to go on board. And we decided we got to make sure we take it out. They're protecting Fort Stevens, and we got to take it out so we can come back and regain some land, some area we lost. All right, so we get prepared, go on board, we fight our way, and then all of a sudden, one of the ropes that anchored to the docks broke loose. And the satellite just swear and ran into the dock. We had to abandon our mission. So we got off, climbed down. I remember I had a camphor. Okay, camphor is a chemical that it was used in oil and lamps. All right, and I said, no, you can't take it. It's here. Let's burn it. So here's an alarm on, and I'm on the ship. I'm looking. I'm pouring camphor out. Grabbed another one. All my men, I made sure they got away before I got a torch to put it on. Dumped it all out, got the torch. The flames started. I abandoned ship. I just jumped overboard. Met my man about 2 minutes later. Next time we turned around to look at the event, everything was up in flames. Right, so that kind of like, at that point, my term was over, and we just stayed there until 1865, and I would put out probation, decide what I'm going to do next. The war's over. I was receiving commendation from President Davis. I received the first lieutenant, and now what do I do? Got to decide, well, I know what I'm going to do. I said, you going back home to your home? I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. Do I come back to West Virginia? Not my home. I know where I'm going to go. Halifax. Nova Scotia. Captain had an idea. Let's go to Nova Scotia. They're friendly to us. We'll go out there and see what we can start. Right? He and I started a brick yard business. He was also in the mining business. So, worked out pretty well. My family was pretty well off, but I said, I'm still reluctant to come back to West Virginia. And after 5 years, I said, you know what? That leash is pulling on me. That leash is connected. So I said, okay, I'm going to be accepted. I returned to Wheeling and became involved with civic duty. I'm an engineer. I'm involved in real estate. And was even city manager here for 7 years. I was the chief engineer on that bridge. Okay. Now, after a time period, I got along well. My brother was a doctor. My sister married without having any information on her. She died at a younger age. And walking down there, if you would just happen to be curious, count 43 from the north end toward the south end. You find a keystone.
Cool.
You find a keystone. Okay. Now it's ironic because basically my new life started for me in 1891 building that bridge. Thank you.
My name is Eliza Hughes, and Wheeling was my home during the Civil War. My father was Thomas Hughes. He was a gunsmith by trade, but he was also into a variety of other activities. He was the city treasurer. He served on city council for 32 years. He was involved in lumber and other activities like that, and he was on the board of the Wheeling and Belmont Bridge Company that built the Wheeling Suspension Bridge. Now, sadly, my father died just a few months before it opened in 1849, but I'm sure he was able to watch the progress because we lived in a house on the riverside of North Main Street at that time. My mother, Mary Odenbaugh, was a Pennsylvania native, as my father was, and she was the daughter of German immigrants. Together, my parents had 10 children, 7 of whom survived to adulthood, and I was the oldest of the survivors. I was followed by 4 brothers and 2 more sisters. So as I said, we grew up in North Wheeling, and my brother John actually lived there for many years, well into the post-war years, at the address of 724 Main Street. And I understand there's a group called Friends of Wheeling that is rehabbing that house. So when you go by, say hello to John. Now, John was in the lumber business and also served on city council. Now, Wheeling at the time was the largest city in Western Virginia, so it was quite industrialized and quite busy. One of the major occupations in Wheeling was to be a tailor, to serve the wealthy industrialists. And so my brother Thomas Jr. was apprenticed at a very early age to a local tailor, and eventually became one of the most successful tailors in all of what became West Virginia. My brother Alfred was a homeopathic physician. Now, homeopathic physicians believed in natural cures, like herbs and plants and minerals and things like that. He was quite successful. Well, I was very interested in what he did. Even though he was quite a bit younger, he let me use his textbooks, and I became interested enough that I went on to college and received a degree in homeopathic medicine. Then I returned and partnered with my brother in his medical practice. And I believe that I am the first female college-educated doctor in what is now West Virginia. My specialty was women and children's diseases, and Alfred served the rest of the community. Now, as I said, Wheeling was very industrialized and very busy, but a very pleasant place to live for those of us who had the means to enjoy it, until the Civil War came. And then things became quite uneasy. In April of 1861, there was a vote to decide whether Virginia should secede from the Union and join the South. It was called the Ordinance of Secession. Now, my brothers, Thomas and Alfred, and I, believed in supporting our home state of Virginia. How could we turn our back on our home? And so both Thomas and Alfred signed that ordinance and were considered traitors because of that. Now, of course, they wouldn't let women vote at the time, but I definitely supported the Southern cause. And in fact, I wrote a letter to Congress and offered my services as a doctor. Now, he didn't take me up on the offer, but he wrote me a lovely letter back. And I'd like to just read you part of that. I cherish this. It read in part, "Your kind offer adds another to the many instances of women's self-sacrificing devotion and heroism. With such a spirit, gloriously in the bosom of our fair country women, how can we doubt the justice and final triumph of our cause?" Is that beautifully written? Oh my goodness. Well, my brother Thomas eventually signed the oath of allegiance to the Union, and we were
was still part of the tailoring business. Her name was Mary Leach. What a detestable person, and we're sure that she was the one who convinced Thomas to sign that oath. So I wrote a nasty letter to her. And I'll just read a little bit of it. Oh, it was also a beautifully written letter. It was quite strong language. I accused her of being a kept mistress, of being the blackest curse to our family that ever God let live. I accused her of bodily prostitution and of using her old, dried, stinking carcass to influence us. To take this contemptible oath. Now, Mary didn't take kindly to this letter. She actually sued me for defamation. And do you believe that the court made me apologize to her? Well, back to my story. My brother, Alfred, stood by his convictions and refused to sign the oath of allegiance. So he was arrested and sent to Columbus, Ohio, to Camp Chase, which was the Union prison camp. He was there for about 7 months. Meanwhile, his wife and 5 children were still here in Wheeling, and during that time, they wrote to each other nearly every day. Fortunately, the family over the years kept those letters, and there are many copies of those that are still available. In fact, I think Friends Wheeling has copies of a number of them. Never right here. If you'd like to take a look afterwards, feel free. You'll see that Mary had beautiful penmanship, but she didn't believe in punctuation or spelling. And so her letters just go on and on and on and on. Now, Alfred, on the other hand, of course, was very educated and had good spelling and good grammar and good punctuation, but he was a doctor, so his handwriting was very difficult. I wrote to him a few times, mainly asking his opinion on various medical cases that were still coming to me. And so copies of those letters are still around as well. And I understand there's a gentleman in our presence, Mr. Wayne Farley, who actually has original letters from the family in his collection. So Wayne, give a how great it is that the future generation is able to see what life was like in Wheeling during that turbulent time. Now, Alfred was eventually released from prison. He was exchanged for a Union prisoner. And he and most of the family went to Richmond, and he served in the Virginia legislature for the rest of the war, and was a doctor to Mrs. Robert E. Lee. His son, Tommy, served as a student, as a cadet at VMI. Now, I stayed in Wheeling during this time, but you know what my feelings were, and I was harassed greatly by the local marshal, Edward Henry Morton. You'll hear about his arresting another Confederate supporter a little bit later today. Well, they did arrest me at one point, even though I was a female and unable to vote. I was in jail overnight. How about after this? And so I eventually signed the oath, although it was definitely under protest. Well, the war was finally over. I stayed in Wheeling. I continued my practice very successfully. And this is where I ended my life. So thank you for listening today.
This is Wheeling. It's a city that you have created a lot of money. We had a huge farm up in Oakland. Big farm, big house, livestock, slaves. He was very well off. And I had a brother, William. William got everything. William got the best education that you could buy in the city of Wheeling. William got to go to Washington College, and when he came back, Father installed him in his own dry goods business. Pretty good deal. Well, my brother and my father created one of the biggest scandals this city had ever seen, and actually this entire valley had ever seen. Seems like Father went to Richmond, Virginia, and he bought a slave girl for $600, and her name was Lucy Bagby. Father brings Lucy back, installs her on the farm with the rest of the slaves, and that was that. 5 years later, Father gave William Lucy Bagby. Well, Lucy figured out a way to get across that big river and into the free state of Ohio. Well, my father and William were livid. They were so angry. They gathered all the paperwork that they needed, bill of sales, and any other documents, and they hunted her down. And they found her in Cleveland. She was working as a maid in a home there. Well, they presented their papers to the courts. We want Lucy back. And the court gave them Lucy back. Well, people in Cleveland said, oh, no, Lucy's wonderful. We want to keep her. They offered William $3,000 to get Lucy back. I don't know. Stubbornness, stupidity. William said nope, and then dragged Lucy back here to Wheeling. Well, it was a big news story in Cleveland. All of the newspapers carried the story. It got back to Wheeling, and the people in Wheeling then became up in arms. There were newspaper articles. There were discussions at meetings. There were mentions in pulpits and churches. And the city of Wheeling was furious with my brother and my father. So my father had to go Senator Charleston to live with other members of the family, and that was that. Well, now let me tell you about my life, my family. I married Benjamin Kelley. He was an up-and-coming young man. He would go from job to job, and every job was several rungs up the ladder. We had 6 children. We had 4 boys and 2 girls. And then I became ill. Why me? Why am I ill? Let me tell you, ladies. Let me tell you why you could be declared ill. Let me tell you why they could send you to the hospital, to the asylum in those days. Maybe you were disrespectful. Maybe you were depressed. Maybe you were angry. Maybe you were disruptive. How about this? Religion. Wrong religion? Too much religion? Not enough religion? Maybe you like to have a little drink or two after dinner. Not a good idea. How about this city ran on tobacco, but let somebody catch you smoking? They could put you away for anything. My favorite is, they could put you away if your dad left you a sizable inheritance and your husband wanted it for himself without any control whatsoever. They could put you away for anything. I was angry about it then, and I am still angry about it. Anyway, I died in that asylum. Just died. But I kept my eyes on my family. I watched them from the grave. Now, Benjamin, my husband, was a great Union supporter, a staunch Union supporter, and he founded a unit right here in Wheeling, the 1st Virginia, and it was comprised mostly of Wheeling men. My 4 boys, actually the older 3, volunteered, of course, immediately. John was a lieutenant colonel, William was a colonel, Benjamin was, do you call it? Quartermaster, thanks. And Tappan was the youngest. He didn't join until he turned 16, the day he turned 16. My two daughters, they both married Union soldiers. Now, when the unit was organized and ready to go, they were sent to Philippines, and there was a battle there, maybe a skirmish. But anyway, Benjamin was injured really pretty seriously. Dr. Thurman, a wheeling doctor, took care of him, patched him up as well as he could, and sent him back to Wheeling. It was sad, isn't it sweet? They'll meet each other at the pearly gates. I don't think so. Well, Benjamin didn't die. Benjamin got better. Benjamin healed. Benjamin went back to the army and was promoted all the way up to general. When the war ended, Benjamin remarried. The boys had gone to their own lives except for Tappan. Tappan never got over his days in the war. He died 2 years after the war of consumption. Now, maybe you want to know what happened to Lucy. Let me tell you. Lucy was free by Abraham Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation, and she went back to Cleveland. She did come back to Wheeling once when William died. I don't know if she wanted to give her condolences or make sure he was dead. Anyway, that was my life. I know there's still other people that want to talk to you, and I hope they have better stories than I do. Thank you.
Making an entrance.
Make some notes on my trip up here, but I really should be here. My name is Ellie Poole. It's very strange to be up here again in the north. I can't stay long. I don't know who you are. You know, when I'm here, I always feel like somebody's chasing me. That's how I left here in 1861. It's terrible. I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, I was born here in 1838, and I later became a teacher. And I taught at the 4th Board School in East Wheeling. By 1860, though, there was a lot of talk of war, and whether we should stay in the Union or whether we should just go ahead and stay with Virginia and be loyal to them. Well, I'm a Southerner. Many of the discussions were held right here in this room. Well, most people in Wheeling favored the Union, and my family chose the South. So on May 23rd, 1861, many of the men here in Wheeling voted for the Ordinance of Secession. That was, of course, for Virginia to leave the Union and join the South. My brother Jerome chose to do that, and he was considered a traitor. Of course, women weren't allowed to vote, and I wanted to do my best to support the South. So, what I did was I had a guitar, and in my guitar case, I took some very, very secret information, and I traveled from here to Norfolk, from here to Norfolk, from here to Richmond, from here to Richmond. And everybody knew what was in that guitar
me stay in my own house, and they put a guard on me. Well, that night, I was in my bed where I was ill, but I got up. I escaped. Now, I'm not going to tell you how I escaped because I might have to do that again sometime. But I made my way to the Ohio River and I boarded a steamboat headed for Cincinnati. On the river, I made friends with a Union officer, silly guy. He talked rather freely to me about what the affairs of the government was. Little did he know, my sympathies were to the south. I traveled to Louisville, Kentucky, and then I boarded a train and went on to Indiana. Well, I was arrested again, and I was brought before General William T. Sherman himself. I had about $7,500 in Confederate money. Well, that looked a little bit suspicious. So then he sent me to Washington, D.C., and there I was placed under arrest with Rose Greenwald. Well, it was called Greenwald Prison, but it was actually her beautiful home. And so we then were put on the second level of her home. Oh, we really had it made. We had a piano, we had a fireplace, and really nice. So I imagine, though, that she was also under arrest. And maybe you heard of Wild Rose, because in her younger days, that's what she was called, because she was the widow of a State Department employee and a member of the highest society in Washington, D.C. Well, they say she passed secret messages to Confederate General Pierre Beauregard, and they were messages saying what the North was going to do for the first battle of Bull Run. And President Jefferson Davis even credited her with the South winning that war, or that one battle. Well, there were several ladies there. That was rather funny. Oh, well, one was Mrs. Baxter, and she was from Baltimore, Maryland. And she was quite outspoken, but her mouth, oh my goodness, her language was terrible, and it really hurt our delicate ears. But she and I had fun. We suffered from fainting fits. And so we'd fall on the floor, and we would cry out for help for the lieutenant to come and help us. Well, he and his 3 officers would come, and they would have their bayonets and everything, but they also had a bottle of brandy to revive us. Those were fun evenings. They were silly ones too. But the close of 1861, the authorities offered me a release if I promised not to support the South by giving information anymore. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't want just a release. I want an unconditional release. So they said no, and there I was in prison for a few months more. And it got kind of boring, so I said in early 1862, I signed a paper pledging my support for the Union and vowing not to support the South. But what did that mean? Did they think I wasn't going to support the South? I don't think so. Well, anyway, I was released and I went to Lynchburg, Virginia. And while I was there, there was a young man by the name of William Lowenberg. I'm sorry, I'm married to him, my God. William Lowenberg. And he was suffering from wounds that he had gotten during one of the battles. So he and I became good friends, and we were married. And we had 5 children. And it was so wonderful. He actually worked in the Lynchburg City Treasurer's office, so we had a very good life. But you know, years later, the official records of the war listed me as a shrewd and dangerous spy. I love it. Thank you very much.
Where's the gentleman to pick up my...
Don't faint. No brandy here.
You have brandy.
Good morning. I am Major General Jesse Lee Reno. I was born exactly 40 years before West Virginia became state, on June 20th of 1823. I was the third of 8 children of Rebecca and Louis Reno. I grew up in Wheeling. But when I was 7, my family moved to Pennsylvania. My formative years were then spent in Franklin. In 1842, I was appointed to the United States Military Academy at West Point by Congressman Plumer from Pennsylvania. When I entered West Point, made many friends and many classmates, and I ended up graduating number 8 out of a class of 59.
That's pretty good.
The class of 1846, which was my class, was probably the most renowned class in the history of the military academy. While there, one of my closest friends was a gentleman named Tom Jackson, who was from Clarksburg. Also in my class were future Union generals, George McClellan, you might have heard of him. There was George Stoneman, the Riot's Couch, John Gibbon, who served at Gettysburg, and Samuel Sturgis. Now, there were a few Confederate generals in that class. Ambrose Powell Hill, Cadmus Wilcox, and a gentleman named George Pickett. Now, you might have heard of him because he commanded one of the divisions in that ill-fated charge on the 3rd day of Gettysburg, which bears his name, Pickett's Charge. However, I never understood why it was called Pickett's Charge because he only commanded one of the 3 divisions. The other 2 being commanded by J.J. Pettigrew and Isaac Trimble. But Pickett got that credit. Pickett, by the way, graduated 59th in our class of 59. I'm not sure if generally knew that, but I think probably did. When I left West Point, I served in the Mexican War. In April 1847, I was wounded and cited for bravery and meritorious conduct on the Battle of Cerro Gordo and was brevetted to first lieutenant. 5 months later, wouldn't you know it, I was wounded again. This time I was again cited for bravery and brevetted as a captain following the Battle of Chapultepec. Following the Mexican War, I was sent to Minnesota, of all places. While there, I helped build a nearly 300-mile road from the Big Sioux River to St. Paul. At the end of that year, 1853, I returned back and married my sweetheart, Mary, in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. In 1857, Albert Sidney Johnson led an expedition to Utah. I was his chief ordnance officer. Now let me tell you something about General Johnson. He was probably, in my opinion, the best, most skilled, most dependable general in the entire Confederate Army. On the first day at the Battle of Shiloh, he was wounded, hit, in the back of the knee. He never thought anything of it, but that bullet had nicked his popliteal artery, and he slowly bled to death as blood filled his boot. There's no telling what might have happened after that if General Johnston would have survived. When I returned from Utah, I was assigned to the Mount Vernon Arsenal in Mobile, Alabama. I was there until 1861. In January that year, the states were seceding from the Union. Governor of Alabama ordered the seizure of that arsenal. There wasn't much I could do about it. So I got out of Dodge, and I was assigned to the arsenal at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. I remained there until December of that year. At the beginning of 1862, by that time I had been promoted to Brigadier General, and I accompanied General Ambrose Burnside on his North Carolina expedition in February of 1862. During that time, I led a successful assault on Fort Bartow, and my units after that were assigned to the 9th Corps of the Army of the Potomac. And I was given command of the 2nd Division of that army. At the Battle of Second Bull Run, or as the Southerners call it, Second Manassas, my division went up against the division of my former classmate at West Point, Tom Jackson, who by this point was known as Stonewall. Once General Lee began his first invasion of the North, I was assigned to command the 9th Corps of the Army of the Potomac when General Burnside was promoted to command the right wing of that army. On September the 13th, I positioned my troops to block the Confederate advance at Fox's Gap on South Mountain. The next day we had a pretty good fight, but we started pushing the Confederates back steadily. But at one point, that advance stalled, and I rode to the front to see what was happening. At that time, a Confederate sharpshooter shot me through the chest, and I fell from my horse with a mortal wound. I was carried to the back, saw my good friend from West Point, Sam Sturgis, and said, "Hello, Sam, I'm dead." And as I lay there later a few hours later, I looked at our surgeon, Dr. Cutter, and said, "Doctor, please tell my men, if I am not with them in body, I will be with them in spirit." And then I expired. My men were grief-stricken. But now that I was in that great battlefield in the sky, I wanted to know what my men were thinking and what everybody else was thinking. So since I was up there, I was pretty close to the cloud. So I got in the cloud and downloaded some information. And a reporter from the New York Herald wrote the following: "Grief at any time is heartrending. With such grief as was manifested by the staff officers and those about me, it has never before been my lot to witness. The old soldier, just come from the scene of carnage, knelt and wept like a child. No eye was dry among those present, and many a silent and spoken resolution was made at that moment that Reno's death should be amply avenged. Thus died one of the bravest generals that was in the service of his country, one of the bright gems in the crown of Burnside, and a man whom all loved and respected." And I figured, as long as I was up there, I wonder what the General Burnside think. So I got into the records of the Confederate and Union armies, and found General Order Number 17, which General Burnside issued the day after my death. commanding general announced to the Corps the loss of their late leader, Major General Jesse Lee Reno. By the death of this distinguished officer, the country loses one of its most devoted patriots, the Army one of its most thorough soldiers. In a long list of battles in which General Reno has fought in his country's service, his name always appears with the brightest luster, and he now has bravely met a soldier's death while gallantly leading his men at the Battle of South Mountain. For his high character and kindly qualities of his heart and private life, as well as for the military duties and personal daring which marked him as a soldier, his loss will be deplored by all who knew him, and the commanding general desires to add a tribute of a friend to the public learning for the death of one of the country's best defenders. 2 days later, at the Battle of Antietam, the members of the Ninth Corps shouted, "Remember Reno," as they went into battle. In 1889, the memorial was erected in my honor at the point where I fell at Fox's Gap. Reno Road in Washington, D.C., Reno County, Kansas, and the city of Reno, Nevada were named in my honor. I am buried at Oak Hill Cemetery in the Georgetown section of Washington, D.C. So if you're ever in the area, please feel free to stop by and say hello. Thank you.